Good evening, everyone, and thank you once again for joining us for this live simulcast of the Mass and the Rosary. We're going to finish tonight with a couple of the questions that have come to us via the internet. But firstly, could I say to you and remind you of one of the great descriptions of Jesus Christ that came to us from St. Thomas Aquinas. He called Jesus both doctor and medicine. And we certainly need both of those things at this time. So I'm proposing that we begin our nightly Mass, telecast of the Mass, with a time of adoration. So tomorrow night we'll be beginning at 6:30 p.m. with a time of exposition of the Blessed Sacrament on the altar here, with Mass beginning at 7 p.m. Speaking of St. Thomas Aquinas, he certainly does help us with the first question I'm going to try and tackle tonight, and that is, one of our viewers asked us, can the coronavirus live on a consecrated host? Now, the first answer to that question is the shortest one: yes, it can. But if we're going to delve into that a little more deeply, we need to go perhaps to one of the great Greek philosophers, Aristotle, and to St. Thomas Aquinas. Aristotle was keen for us to make a distinction between the substance of an individual being and their accidents. The substance being anything that exists in and of itself. So, a man, a woman, a horse, a plant, a stone, all these things have their proper nature and have a substance, of course. Contrast that to what we might understand as a thing's accidents. Accidents sort of live or live or befall or happen to a substance. So consider a substance colour or shape or weight. Things like knowledge, virtue, fatherhood, maternity, sonship, all these things are accidents. They live, if you like, or attach themselves to a substance. You never see virtue walking down the road, but you might see a man of virtue walking down the road. You don't see weight walking down the road, but you might see a person who weighs 90 kilograms walking down the road. Justice doesn't walk past us in the street, but you might see a woman who is just. Accidents, if you like, attach themselves or are a sign of the substance. Now, that's important for us when we think about the sacraments. You see, most of the change that we identify in the world we might call accidental change. If you have your car and you paint it red, and someone asks you later on, do you have a new car? Now you say, no, that's the same car, I've just painted it. Those of you who perhaps have known me from being a child, you'll notice that I'm a lot bigger than I was when I was a child. I have less hair, for instance, as well. It's always been me, of course, but my appearance has changed. The accidents have changed, but substantially it's always been me. That's sort of the nature of most of the change we see in the world. Now here's the important thing. In a sacrament, the change is exactly the opposite. The accidents stay the same, but the substance changes. Think of a couple who are getting married. They come into the church here, they get married, and they walk out of the church. Now they look the same. I'm guessing they weigh the same. They're wearing the same clothes, but after they've left the church, they're different. You see, they're not single anymore. They're married. At the level of who they are, they've changed, but the accidents have remained the same. And I'm getting to my point here. The coronavirus that's on the sacred consecrated host is living on the accidents of the host, even though the host that was once bread is now the body and soul and blood and divinity of Jesus Christ. Yes, you can catch the coronavirus from the chalice containing the sacred blood, and you can even catch the coronavirus, sadly, from a sacred host? That's our first question for tonight. We don't have a huge amount of time, but some of you are contacting me and saying, Father, I want to go to confession, but I just can't find a priest that's available in these very difficult times. Is there something that we can do? Well, yes, there is, and it's a beautiful thing. We can take the chance, in the absence of sacramental confession, to make a perfect act of contrition. Now, there are two types of acts of contrition. There's an act of contrition, and then there's a perfect act of contrition. The difference is that an act of contrition is made out of fear of the consequences of our sin, out of a fear of hell, out of a fear of punishment. But a perfect act of contrition is motivated by our love of God. You'll know a perfect act of contrition when I start to read it out to you. This is an example. "O my God, I am heartily sorry for having offended thee, and I detest all my sins, because I dread the loss of heaven and the pains of hell, but most of all, because they offend thee, my God, who art all good and deserving of all my love." Notice that second part there. A perfect act of contrition is motivated by our love of God. If you are unable to make a sacramental confession, please take the chance to make a perfect act of contrition. By the way, a perfect act of contrition always includes the desire for the sacrament of penance when it's available, the intention to receive sacramental confession at the very first opportunity. Look, finally, I want to finish tonight with this mysterious business at the moment of spiritual communion. Look, one of the last great plagues to hit the world was the plague in Europe. And one of the great saints of the church, St. Charles Borromeo, had a remedy for that. Yes, he closed all the churches in Milan, just as our bishops have done here in New Zealand. But he ordered that the celebration of Mass take place outdoors so people could watch from their houses. You've watched the Mass tonight from your house. In a way, nothing's changed. And that instinct of St. Charles Borromeo was that in watching the celebration of the Mass, the offering of the Mass, we could join ourselves to Christ and his offering of himself to the Father. In fact, the Catechism in 1368 teaches us that we are the members of Christ's body, the Church. So when Jesus in his entirety offers himself to the Father, he offers us as well. At every Mass that happens. So to make a spiritual communion, we ought to conceive inside of us a real desire to offer ourselves in love, united with Jesus, to the Father. In this way, we are in communion with Jesus in his self-offering, and we have made a spiritual communion.